As the Georgia legislature began to kick back, other more ominous events were unfolding. The discovery of gold in Cherokee territory, which caused a stampede of white prospectors, and the first stirring of a populist political movement that sent tremors through Indian lands all over the East. This hard-edged new movement found voice in Andrew Jackson, whose ascent to the presidency in 1829 owed to the newly enfranchised Southern frontiersmen. In his first address to Congress, President Jackson announced his intention to do as his voters pleased, which is to say rid the East of the Indian tribes once and for all. He championed new legislation, giving him power to offer the tribes land west of the Mississippi, if they would go nicely.
The Indian removal bill was Jackson's first priority once he was in office. It became the first major focus of his administration. It did reflect a fundamental shift in the way that America was beginning to define itself. Not very many people in Georgia and Tennessee, Alabama at that time were willing to even go so far as to say that Indian people were people.
The thinking of the day becomes more racist, that the Cherokees are inferior and cannot be like the whites. It's convenient rhetoric to say that Cherokees are inferior and we need to get them out of the way, out of harm's way, as Jackson would put it.
Other tribes read the bleak signs and reluctantly began to prepare for removal. But the Cherokees reached out for support among their friends and benefactors along the eastern seaboard.
The Cherokees were one of the civilized tribes. They had made such strides. So they cut a sympathetic figure to Northeasterners.
I ask you, shall red men live, or shall they be swept from the earth? It is with you and this public at large the decision chiefly rests. Must they perish? Will you push them from you, or will you save them?
The congressional debate over the Indian removal bill was a sectional brawl that drew the entire country's attention. A campaign organized by benevolent ladies flooded Congress with pro-Indian letters and petitions. Who can look an Indian in the face, one senator thundered, and say to him, for more than 40 years we have made to you the most solemn of promises. We now violate and trample upon them all, but offer you in their stead another guarantee. New England senators voted 11-1 against Jackson's removal bill, but the unanimous bloc of Southerners assured its passage in the Senate. The vote was closer in the House, 102-97, but the legislation passed, and President Andrew Jackson's signature made Indian removal the law of the land.
The state of Georgia basically said to its citizens, this land is yours. They divided up with the land lottery and basically told their people to have at it.
While white settlers bought up lottery tickets and a chance at Cherokee land, the Georgia legislature bent itself to obliterating the state within its state, passing new laws overriding Cherokee sovereignty. Meetings of the Cherokee legislature and courts were deemed illegal. All people residing on Cherokee land were now subject to Georgia law. Missionaries who had lived among the Cherokees for years were forced to sign oaths of allegiance to Georgia. Those who refused were jailed.
And Jackson basically told Cherokees that he couldn't do anything about it. It was state rights, and they couldn't have any protection from the federal government. The only way they were going to get protection was if they moved.
Making a plan to battle Andrew Jackson and Georgia fell to the Cherokees' newly elected principal chief. Major Ridge had decided not to run for the office, asserting that the Cherokees would be best served by an English-speaking chief. His own son was too young, so the Ridge backed John Ross. At 38, Ross himself was barely eligible, but he won election easily, and one of his first acts in office, rewriting the blood law, sent a clear signal. Any Cherokee who made a deal to sell land to the United States without the consent of the entire tribe faced dire and certain consequences. Citizens of this nation, the law read, may kill him or them so offending, in any manner most convenient. Chief Ross then set out to shame Jackson and the supporters of Indian removal, and he was going to use the United States federal courts to do it. Along with America's most esteemed advocate, former Attorney General William Wirt, Ross and his closest advisors began to frame the Cherokees' argument for self-determination in their own territory. The Cherokee Nation and their supporters filed more than a dozen separate suits in federal court. 2 made it all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. The question in both cases was the flashpoint of American politics in 1830. Where did federal authority end and states' rights begin? Did federal treaties with the Cherokee Nation supersede Georgia state law? Or could Georgia do as she pleased within her borders? The court dodged the question in the first case, but in the second, Worcester v. Georgia, it could not. Samuel Worcester, a missionary who lived in the Cherokee Nation, had been jailed by Georgia officials for refusing to take an oath of allegiance. Wirt argued that his arrest was unconstitutional, that Cherokee tribal laws could not be written over by the state of Georgia. The opinion of the court, written by Chief Justice John Marshall, could not have been more clear. The Cherokee Nation is a distinct community, Marshall wrote, occupying its own territory, with boundaries accurately described, in which the laws of Georgia can have no force, and which the citizens of Georgia have no right to enter, but with the assent of the Cherokees themselves.
What else could you ask for but a very clear and sympathetic order of the highest court in the land, interpreting the supreme law of the land? And the Cherokees just were ecstatic.
They followed the law. They followed this policy of a government-to-government relationship. And the Supreme Court decision was a complete vindication.
Now, finally, this is their victory. Now they'll have some protection.
John Ridge was still in Washington when he got word that the state of Georgia was refusing to recognize the Supreme Court decision, or the sovereignty of the Cherokee Nation.
He goes to the White House and gets an audience with President Jackson. He asked him bluntly if he will force Georgia to comply with the Supreme Court's order. And Jackson says he will not.
Andrew Jackson, the only president in the history of the United States to openly defy a Supreme Court order. He is said to have remarked that Chief Justice Marshall made his decision, let him enforce it. And to the Georgians, he said, light a fire under them, they'll move.